becoming masterful at divination, becoming a masterful reader, requires developing the skill of not only knowing how to divine well, but also knowing when not to divine. And when we begin our journey into divination and to studying the tarot and studying the Lenormand, or to studying psychic development and psychic reading in general, we become enthusiastic and we start feeling like we should be divining on everything, and that it's kind of the panacea to all ills, that the excitement of the clarity that comes from a good reading, that aha feeling that comes from a reading elicits in us this enthusiasm. And what I like to say to clients and how I like to come at readings is that there needs to be a need for the reading. There needs to be something that has provoked it, a problem or an issue of some sort that brings you to the reading, that not only will give you the reading the energy that it needs for the reading to be fulfilled, but can also help avoid some of the problems that can come from reading without reading tactlessly or reading clumsily on something. And there are a couple of scenarios in which we can start reading clumsily, when we can read for the sake of reading rather than out of a real need. For example, if a client comes to me and says to me, you know, I've got this new boyfriend and everything is great and we're falling in love and we're going on vacation, and you know, I just want a reading. I want to see how it's going to go. You know, I don't recommend that. I certainly do not recommend a predictive reading, a reading where we're going to read on future outcomes in a predictive sense, where we're going to define divine outcomes and see what's going to happen. I will not recommend a reading in a question like that, for the simple reason that you want to live your life, you want to have your experiences, you want to encounter the relationship fresh, and you want to see what happens. You want to live your life in an open way. Secondly, you want to leave sleeping dogs to lie, because the cards and the intelligence that operates through divination can be a little bit mischievous, I find. And I find if you ask questions about situations that are fine, then often curiosity ends up killing the cat. And you might have this lovely holiday planned and everything is going well with your boyfriend, and it shows it's a disaster. It's chaos. And now we are thrown into turmoil. What to make of this reading? We come to this reading hoping to find inspiration and upliftment, and now we are confronted with an ill omen, something quite negative. And unfortunately, when we are reading on sort of vague, how will it turn out kind of situations, without a need, without a problem, to create a framework and a context, it becomes all the more difficult to pinpoint where this disaster will come from, where this problem will come from. So this can produce a massive amount of anxiety in the client or in yourself if you're reading in this skillless, tactless, craftless way. And often a reading of this sort that then opens up Pandora's box, as it will show something really negative. And I'm talking about predictive readings. I'm gonna address readings that are geared towards advice in a moment, but I'm talking about purely predictive readings that are meant to look at the development of a situation in a predictive sense. that when a reading of this nature comes up, when we were being frivolous, when everything was fine and we were asking a question that was just out of curiosity, and it shows us all these problems, when everything up until that point has been fine, it can in fact trigger a series of events that can precipitate the outcome of that negative reading. Now, you may, if you're familiar with Shakespeare's Macbeth, the catalyst in that play, very famously, is Macbeth coming upon the witches, who then deliver this prophecy. And then, of course, all the events that unfold as the play continues is in fact Macbeth's reaction to this prophecy. And then by reacting to the prophecy of the witches, he makes it happen. He makes this terrible thing happen. So this is what I like to call the Macbeth effect. And this is one of the curious ways in which, or one of the little dark corners or dark avenues of divination that's not very openly discussed. We tend to want to speak of it as purely a healing art, or purely a constructive thing, something that's for the good, and you know, is kind of a wondrous, helpful thing in all regards. But you know, like all things in life, like magic, like relationships, like careers, like anything worth doing, it has its dark nooks and crannies. It has its paradoxes, and it has its shady alleys where you need to be cautious. And this is one of those alleys, I find, in my opinion, that by frivolously reading like this, we can in fact provoke a negative reading. We can have something pretty disastrous shown in the cards, and then react to that emotionally, and our emotional reaction then sets about this very series of events. It's quite paradoxical, because there is a sort of a feedback loop that happens where what we see in the reading begins then fueling our actions, and then, you know, setting about a course of events. For example, you know, everything is fine in the relationship, you do this reading, it shows a problem in the relationship, and you start obsessively checking your boyfriend's texts, you know, looking at his phone, for example. And sure enough, you find something suspicious. He discovers, you know, that you've been checking his phone, and all hell breaks loose, and everything that you saw in that reading then comes about because you started checking his phone. But why did you check his phone? Because you had the reading. So you start asking your question, well, what caused this problem? Did this nonsense reading, did this you know, mucking about with the cards not cause your problem, rather than what you think caused your problem? And I think sometimes that this can be the case. And this doesn't apply only to relationships. I often say to clients, you know, if they come to me and they're having an important job interview the next day or the next week, and they want to get a reading, will they get the job? I will say, let's postpone this reading until after the interview, and then once you've had the interview and you're waiting for the outcome, you can come for the reading and I'll gladly read for you. What I don't want to do is, I don't want to give a client a bum reading or a dark reading just before an interview that's going to psych them out, that's going to make them nervous, that's going to put doubt into their mind, that's going to put self-doubt into their mind. And this is definitely one of the ways that we can cause great harm as readers. And I often hear this from clients, where they have gone to a reader, and a reader has done this, perhaps with good intentions, perhaps in good faith. The person came for this reading and posed this question to them. But just because a client asks a question doesn't mean you have to answer the question that they ask. Part of the reader's skill is what I like to think of as tactical non-divination. Knowing when not to read, when it will be more helpful not to read. I'd rather like to turn to the cards and do a non-predictive reading, using divination for advice, how to make sure that the relationship will improve. Find out what your needs are, what his needs are. There are many cool spreads and techniques for doing that don't involve prediction, that can be very helpful and constructive in a situation like that. The same thing with an interview, for example. You're going to go for this reading, for this interview, and instead of going for a reading just before your big interview, will I get the job? And then there's this bum reading that's going to totally psych you out, and then of course you don't get the job because you arrive there discouraged and scared and in low spirits. Your charisma is nil because you had this crappy reading from this tactless reader. Instead of doing that, the reader can, do a reading on what you can do to impress the interviewer, to find out what your strengths are, to find out maybe what they would like from you, what you need to showcase. Maybe your CV needs work. There are many things that we can read on that is not an outcome for a situation like that, where having that information can be harmful. So that's it. Tactical non-divination. I trust you found that interesting and helpful. Remember to like or to subscribe, and thank you for watching.